My wife and daughter abandoned me when I was sick. Years later, they returned to claim my house. But there's more to the story. I was diagnosed with advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma, which shocked me because I had been active, ate well, and regularly saw the doctor for checkups. The oncologist explained that the exact cause of cancer is not fully understood. I had a slim chance of survival, but I needed intense chemotherapy. Despite the odds, I was prepared to fight for my life. After receiving my diagnosis, I sat down with my wife, Janet, whom I'd been married to for 15 years, and my teenage daughter, Layla. They were devastated, but I reassured them that I would do my best to battle the illness. I worried about how our family would cope, as the doctor warned that the chemotherapy would be tough and I would need all the support possible. The oncologist also cautioned that many marriages don't survive the treatment process. Later that night, I shared these worries with my wife. She promised to stand by me, uphold our vows, and assist me through the sickness. Fortunately, I had excellent insurance, substantial savings, and a trust fund from my late grandfather. While the treatment would be expensive, it wouldn't leave us in financial ruin. Our house was completely paid for, and I had already saved up money for my daughter's college in case something happened to me. My colleagues at work threw a farewell party and wished me well for my tough journey ahead. I began chemotherapy a week later, and it was incredibly harsh. When I returned home, I felt like I had been hit by a train. I could hardly take care of myself and had very little energy for basic tasks like walking or bathing. My wife and daughter did their best to assist me. They brought me food, managed the household chores, took me to my chemo appointments, and made sure I had my prescribed medications. I tried not to burden them too much and did small things for myself when I could. This went on for 2 months. I could tell that my wife and daughter were getting more and more frustrated with me. I sensed their hesitation whenever I asked for help. Even taking me to chemo seemed to annoy my wife. Things reached a breaking point when I had an early chemo appointment. One day, I noticed I was running a bit late and my wife had not come downstairs from our room. I called out to ask if she was ready, and she sounded tired and suggested that I just take an Uber to the hospital because she was worn out. I was really surprised at the time. Well, I'm not sure. I used Uber and also called the hospital to see if someone could meet me in the parking lot since my wife couldn't assist me. Thankfully, my Uber driver was a very kind woman. She made sure I got inside the building safely and even offered to pick me up when I was done to take me home. I appreciated it, but it was a bit odd and embarrassing to rely on strangers. After getting back home later that day, I rested for a while and then talked to my wife and daughter about how they'd been acting. I brought up how they seemed distant recently and asked if they thought I was a burden. My wife mentioned that they were just feeling overwhelmed, and my daughter said she didn't expect me to need so much help. I suggested hiring a nurse to come a few days a week to assist me and take me to chemo. I also ordered a wheelchair to make it easier to move around when I'm too weak to walk. They agreed with the ideas. I asked the hospital for suggestions, and they sent me a kind but firm in-home nurse. She ensured I made it to my chemo appointments on time, took my medications promptly, and even created a plan for my care that included healthy meals. Everything was going well. The doctors were happy with my progress, but my wife and daughter still didn't seem content. While I was less of a burden now, my wife felt like the nurse was replacing her. I talked to my wife about it. I proposed that if she could handle taking me to chemo, managing my prescriptions, and making sure I ate and took my meds as needed, then I would be okay with letting go of the nurse. I had the nurse because I was a lot for my wife to handle, and she agreed to this compromise. She asked if I'd be okay with a male nurse instead, but I explained there weren't any available from the hospital's recommendations. They had assigned the nurse I had because she had experience with cancer patients and understood my needs. Besides, she was attentive, careful, and respectful. She treated my wife, daughter, and me kindly. The only way I'd consider letting her go was if my wife and daughter were willing to take on all the responsibilities the nurse was handling, but my wife wasn't open to that idea. She told me that I should take care of myself more instead of making my condition everyone else's issue. So, I questioned if she was thinking clearly. I already do everything I can on my own. Some days I could barely even lift my head, let alone stand up. The chemotherapy has really taken a toll on me. She got really angry and went upstairs, slamming doors. I decided to ignore her outbursts and focus on my recovery. Her negativity would only stress me out and worsen things. Later that night, My mother-in-law, who lives 2 states away, called me. She asked why I had brought another woman into her daughter's house. Technically, it's my house under my name. I owned it before we got married. But I chose not to be petty. I explained in a polite way that I needed help, and the level of assistance I required was more than her daughter was willing to give. So I had to bring in a nurse to help with my care, as the previous arrangement was too much for her daughter to handle. I still had at least a month of chemotherapy left, as long as the cancer didn't persist or worsen. The nurse wouldn't be around for much longer. My mother-in-law didn't seem completely convinced, but eventually left me alone, which was all I really wanted. Anyway, everything was going well for about a week after my treatment. Then, one day when I got back from chemo, I saw a moving truck parked in front of my house. My wife, son, and daughter had packed up and told me they were heading to their mom's place indefinitely. I felt hurt and upset, but I was too exhausted to express my feelings properly. What stung more was that she chose to do this right after my chemo session, knowing I'd be drained and unable to talk to her. It just seemed so heartless. I talked to my daughter to understand if this is what she really wanted. She was old enough to make her own decisions. She explained that she'd rather be with her mother because living with me had become too difficult. With tears in my eyes, I watched them leave. This was exactly what I had been fearing. When I began chemo, I already felt abandoned and unwanted. On that particular day, the nurse spent extra time with me and asked if I had any family who could be with me so I wouldn't be alone. My brother was the only family nearby, but he lived 3 hours away and had his own young children. Nevertheless, he said he'd take time off work to be with me until I could find a more permanent solution. When he came over, he was really angry about what my wife had done, calling her selfish and ungrateful. She never needed to have a job. The day after we got married, I ensured she didn't have to wait for anything. My brother could only take a week off work, but he proposed an alternative solution. His wife's sister, Kara, was going through a tough divorce and needed a safe place until she could stand on her own again. Since her husband was the one providing financially, she didn't have much money and couldn't afford rent alone. She was currently studying radiology at university on a scholarship. My home was nearer to the campus, so it worked out well. I'd have company in case of emergencies, and she'd have a place away from her soon-to-be ex-husband. I told my brother I was okay with the arrangement, and Kara wouldn't need to pay rent as she'd already be helping me out. She could choose any available bedroom. I wasn't concerned. My wife and daughter had taken everything except the bed and dresses. My brother stayed for the rest of the week, and on his last day, Kara arrived. He assisted her with her belongings, and she thanked me immensely for letting her stay. She promised to clean up after herself and pitch in where she could. She's really friendly. I assured her that she wouldn't need to do too much, as my nurse would be coming in 7 days a week instead of the usual 4. After saying goodbye to my brother, I did my best to help Kara settle in. Things went smoothly in the weeks that followed. I did miss my wife and daughter, although it seemed like I was the only one feeling that way, given that they didn't even call or check on me. Kara was a tremendous help. She handled most of the grocery shopping, cleaning, and even assisted with preparing meals without any complaints. About a month and a half after my wife left, I received the news that I was cancer-free. Ringing the bell at the hospital was a major highlight for me that year. My nurse asked what I wanted to do first, now that I was essentially cured, and I initiated divorce proceedings. Then I concentrated on the steps to recover from cancer, which was a journey in itself. Gradually, my strength and hair started to come back. My scars began to heal, and I started gaining weight. I mostly stuck to a healthy eating plan, but I allowed myself some cheat days to enjoy my favorite meals that I hadn't had in a while. It's been 6 months since I became cancer-free, and I believe I'm finally prepared to move forward with my life. I reached out to my previous job, and they're open to rehiring me for remote work if I decide to. I'm thinking of accepting the offer since I'm planning to move away. Although I like my current house, it holds too many painful memories. I want to start anew with something smaller. While she doesn't know it yet, I intend to give the house to Kara. She supported me during my lowest moments and showed incredible kindness, even though we were almost strangers. If she chooses, she can sell it. I don't want any connection to it anymore, and I definitely don't want my wife or daughter claiming it. My new residence is in a peaceful, rural neighborhood, and I'm excited for this fresh start. Hey everyone, it's been more than a year since I was initially diagnosed. I've settled well into my new home and neighborhood. There are many friendly people around, including my neighbors across the street. Dorothy, a widow who lives alone, quickly reached out to me. Her children are scattered across the country, but they visit during the holidays and her birthday. She invited me over for drinks and a chat on her porch, and she shared that she lost her husband to lung cancer. If he hadn't left a good life insurance, she and her children would have faced financial struggles. So I shared with her about what happened with my wife and daughter. I hadn't received any communication from them, which is okay. I've moved on. I've been spending my time exploring new hobbies. Woodworking has captured my interest, and I'm gradually building up a collection of tools. One day, when I returned from the hardware store, Dorothy mentioned that she saw some people hanging around my house. Thankfully, they didn't do anything harmful or steal. They approached the door, knocked a few times, wandered around the house a bit, and when nobody came out, they waited in their car for a while. She thought of calling the sheriff's office, but decided not to intervene too much, considering they could have been family. I inquired about their appearance, and she described a woman in her middle years and a teenage girl. That would be my wife and daughter. I'm puzzled about how they discovered where I live, as only my brother and his wife know my address. Why would they even be searching for me now? They left nearly a year ago without looking back. Dorothy advised me that if they returned, I shouldn't go out to confront them. Instead, she said she'd find out what they wanted. This suits me well, as I have no interest in engaging with them after they abandoned me during my lowest point. Later that evening, I called my brother, and he informed me that my wife and daughter had been causing trouble around my old house, bothering Kara and her roommate. Fortunately, she had official records proving that the house belonged to her and was registered under her name. Evidently, she told my wife a false story claiming that she bought the house from me. I think it was a wise decision, as revealing that I gave the house away for free might have made my wife very angry. Still, I feel bad that Kara had to go through that situation, so I personally called her to apologize. Hopefully, if they show up again, I can resolve this issue once and for all. I'm uncertain whether my wife is aware of the unilateral divorce or not. I believe my lawyer sent a copy to her mother's address, but it's possible they mistook it for junk mail and discarded it. In any case, it doesn't matter to me anymore. She and I are no longer together. Update number 2. My wife and daughter visited the house again. This time it was during the daytime while I was working. I heard a knock and checked the security cameras, confirming that it was indeed them. My ex-wife looked unchanged, but Layla had grown considerably. She was almost an adult now. Like Dorothy, I remained indoors but positioned myself closer to the door so I could hear them clearly. I overheard Dorothy going to greet them and introducing herself as the neighbor next door. My wife inquired if Dorothy was acquainted with a man named Richard who used to reside there. Dorothy's response mirrored my own confusion. Did she ask? Used to. My wife clarified that her husband, not ex-husband, used to live in this house before he passed away. Recently, she had discovered whether anyone was living there without permission, as her husband had a lengthy hospital stay before his tragic and untimely death. I was utterly shocked. They believed I was no longer alive. I truly have no idea where they got that information. There was no record of my death anywhere, especially not at the hospital where I underwent treatment. Moving on, my wife continued explaining that they were the closest relatives, so the house legally belonged to them. Dorothy informed them that someone named Richard did indeed reside there for a period, but he was divorced. She shared that during the time we were neighbors, I had confided in her about my wife leaving and my unilateral divorce filing. Dorothy also mentioned my intention to leave all my possessions to charity. To her knowledge, I had no other family aside from my brother, which is why she found it odd to see 2 women snooping around my home. She did admit that she might be mistaken. The atmosphere remained eerily silent for a while before Dorothy inquired whether they possessed a death certificate or a will. Their response was negative. Dorothy advised them that once they had those documents, they could visit the county's records office. If they could prove their rightful ownership of the property, they could obtain the deed in their name. My wife didn't handle this situation well. She confronted Dorothy, asking her who she thought she was, and she began shouting. She claimed that Dorothy had no right to tell her anything about her own husband. My wife told Dorothy to stay out of her business and to stop being so nosy. It was really embarrassing. The people in this neighborhood have all been kind to me, and my ex-wife was causing a scene and disrupting their peace. I considered stepping in and giving her a piece of my mind, but I chose to stick with my plan. Dorothy, who's truly kind, apologized, and explained she was only trying to assist. She returned to her home shortly after, and not long after that, my ex-wife and daughter left. After finishing work, I went over to Dorothy's place to apologize. She said it was okay and shared that she found my wife's behavior distasteful. She found the outburst rather amusing. I wish I could agree. I knew my wife could get quite angry when upset, but this was going too far. If she returns, I'm definitely going to confront her and ask her to let me live in peace. 3. She came back again yesterday. I was in my home office when I heard a loud crash. I headed to the living room, and to my surprise, my front window was shattered and people were outside yelling. I thought there might be a crazy person causing trouble. Well, I wasn't completely wrong. It turned out to be my ex-wife. She had broken my window, and my neighbors were outside trying to stop her. Apparently, she had been making a scene for a while, but I hadn't heard it because I was wearing noise-canceling headphones while I was working. I might not have heard her even if I hadn't paused my music to take a break. Once I got outside, 2 elderly neighbors were attempting to prevent my ex from causing more damage. Both she and Layla were holding baseball bats, and they had already broken a few of my potted plants. I grabbed her arm and questioned if she had lost her mind. Needless to say, she was surprised to see me alive and in person. I told both her and my daughter to leave my property before I called the police. I wasn't aware at that moment, but my neighbors had already contacted them. My ex seemed hurt by my words and asked why I hadn't reached out to her. She assumed that once I got better, she and Layla would have returned. I explained that when we got married, we made vows to support each other, in sickness and in health. But she broke that promise. I no longer wanted any connection with her. She's not my wife anymore. I sent the divorce papers months ago, and I once again told her to leave. Then she asked about our daughter. She mentioned that our daughter is heading to college next year and I can't cover the tuition on my own. I responded that our daughter was also fine with abandoning me, and I'm ready to relinquish all my parental rights to her. This should have been considered before you both left me. I don't want to have anything to do with either of you. Upon hearing that, she shifted from upset to angry. She started yelling at me, labeling me as selfish and heartless, which I found quite amusing. She's the last person who should be calling anyone selfish. I shouted back and called her an entitled a-hole. I made it clear that she wouldn't receive any financial help from me anymore. Just then she swung a bat at me, and that's when the police arrived. They promptly arrested both her and my daughter. They inquired if I wanted to press charges, and I certainly did. My ex-wife and daughter began crying loudly as they were being put into the police car. I didn't feel any sympathy for them. I had captured everything on camera, including my wife breaking the window, and I had already shared the evidence with the police. After my work hours were over, I ordered a new window and cleaned up the shattered glass. Tomorrow, someone will come to fix it. But in the meantime, I've put up a makeshift tarp to keep out the elements. Dorothy kindly provided me with buckets to hold my plants until I can replace the pots. My curiosity led me to do some research regarding why my ex-wife showed up unexpectedly. It turns out her mother passed away 2 months ago, and they discovered that the house they had been staying in wasn't actually owned by her or her late husband. It belonged to his cousin, who decided to kick them out to sell the property. With both of my ex-wife's parents gone, she and our daughter sold most of their belongings and have been living in a motel for a while. Upon returning to our former home and seeing my car, they assumed I had passed away. They went on a search for records of my possessions and purchases. That's how they managed to find me again. In any case, they're facing charges for vandalism, attempted break-in, and attempted offense. Since Layla is underage, she'll receive community service, but my ex-wife is definitely going to face legal consequences due to the evident premeditation. I'm considering obtaining a restraining order as well, at least for the time being. This way, I won't have to worry about her bothering me again for quite a while. I often wonder when I'll move past this. I'm a 24-year-old guy and my fiancée is a 25-year-old woman. We've been together for 6 years. I proposed to her during the COVID pandemic, and shockingly, she was having an affair when she accepted my proposal. It's hard for me to understand why anyone would do that. Accept a marriage proposal from one person while being involved with someone else. I'm not particularly smooth with the ladies. I've always been a bit awkward. But when I met my fiancée, whom I'll refer to as Bess, I fell head over heels in love within a matter of minutes. I had never experienced love before, yet as soon as I met her, I knew she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. Strangely, she seemed to really like me too, and we were discussing kids and the possibility of moving in together by the end of that week. The time leading up to the day I discovered the truth was wonderful for me, though clearly it couldn't have been as great for Bess. One day I caught a glimpse of a message on her phone that gave me pause. That night, I lay awake thinking about it, and while she was sleeping, I got up and went through her phone. I'm quite comfortable with technology. I actually make a living by developing some mobile apps. While I'm not extremely wealthy, I could take a year off without facing serious financial repercussions. In any case, I didn't find anything that definitively proved her affair, but I did come across a lot of suspicious things like deleted messages. She also had a Snapchat contact with an icon suggesting a high level of interaction. Additionally, there were pictures of a guy I didn't recognize. I decided to install spyware on her phone, so I searched on Google and picked the priciest service available. This software allowed me to remotely access the camera and microphone. The following day, Bess was set to embark on a 5-day business trip. Given her sales job, this wasn't particularly unusual. However, once she left, the messages between them began flowing. I was utterly devastated. I ended up vomiting multiple times due to the shock of what I was reading. For quite a while, I resisted accepting the reality of it all. Eventually, I became fixated and started delving into anything I could access. I learned that their affair had commenced more than 2 months before I proposed. Her affair partner, a coworker, was a married man 10 years older than her. He had 3 children, and his wife was 7 months pregnant at that time. The ultimate blow was when I could hear them being intimate in a hotel room. They professed their love for each other, disparaged me and his wife, and even discussed the idea of running away to form a new family. This utterly devastated me. I was at a loss regarding what to do. I didn't have the courage to call and confront her. Eventually, I reached out to my childhood best friend, whom we'll call KK, grew up in a Brazilian favela and was tough as nails. He and his mother moved next door when I was 12, in the UK to be clear. K's father had passed away a few years prior, although we never talked about it much. His mother explained that he died due to random offense. My own mother left when I was 10. She had an addiction to pills, and my father never remarried. Although K didn't know English at all, over that first summer, we became close friends and learned each other's languages to some extent. It seems we bonded strongly due to our shared traumas. K and I have been inseparable since, which is a bit odd given that I'm a conflict-avoidant and socially awkward nerd. On the other hand, K is quite popular and fearless. He's not particularly large or muscular, but he's undoubtedly tough. K is widely loved. During high school, someone organized a surprise party for him and a whopping 250 people attended. Meanwhile, I can probably count my friends using one hand, and even then, 3 of them are more acquaintances than true friends. I confided in K, sharing the messages and emails I had uncovered. He remained silent for a significant period. He informed me that he couldn't offer specific advice because this was a matter I needed to handle on my own. I had to deal with it in the way that felt right for me. Then, he recounted an experience he had when he was with a girl who had cheated on him. He went to great lengths, exposing her to family and friends and cutting off all contact. I was utterly lost, and Kay's suggestion was the only thing I had to go on. I expressed my desire to do something similar to Bess. Over the next few days, we packed up all of Bess's belongings and took them to a storage unit. We changed the locks on my apartment and got ready to pick her up from the airport. Thankfully, Kay was the one driving, as I was actually sitting on my hands to conceal their trembling. When Bess got into the car, despite her cheerful demeanor, she instantly sensed that something was amiss with me. I simply mentioned that I wasn't feeling well. With a smile, Kay told her that I had a fun surprise planned for her at her parents' house. Throughout the entire trip, I remained silent, avoiding letting her see my face and attempting to fake a smile as best as I could. From the moment Bess entered the car, the rest of the day seemed to unfold in slow motion. The day prior, I had spoken to her parents and informed them that we were coming over. I told them that I had an exciting announcement to make. Upon our arrival, there were warm embraces and smiles, and I almost backed out at that point. I genuinely care for her parents. They've treated me well and always made me feel like part of the family. Soon enough, Bess was seated on the couch between her parents. At a certain point, someone inquired about the big surprise. Kay encouraged me to proceed. I began by expressing my deep affection for her parents and my gratitude for their warm reception and the way they made me feel like part of the family. Then I became emotional and struggled to speak for a few minutes. I had a well-prepared speech, eloquent and composed, but I completely blanked on it. So I blurted out, "Bess has been cheating on me with a coworker who has children, and his wife is 7 months pregnant. The engagement is off, the wedding is off, and our relationship is over. Bess, your belongings are in this storage unit." I dropped the key on the floor. "This is a permanent goodbye." I left while everyone remained in stunned silence. I overheard Kay telling them that I needed time to heal and to please only contact me if it's truly necessary. In the car, Kay advised me to post on the Facebook group. This group was where we were organizing the wedding. Everyone was part of it. My entire family, her whole family, friends, everyone. I posted a brief message that was nearly identical to what I had shared with her parents, and then I left the group. Kay kept saying he was proud of me and assured me that someday I would look back and be glad I stood up for myself. I was utterly shocked. Nothing about this situation felt positive or even real. Our next planned stop was at the coworker's wife's place. When she opened the door, I immediately blurted everything out without even introducing myself. I'm quite certain she slapped me at some point. As I handed her a thumb drive containing the evidence, her husband emerged from behind her. His wife began to shout immediately, instructing him to leave and not approach her. He attempted to offer excuses, but the moment he took a step forward, Kay was right there in his face in an instant. "You heard the lady, get out!" After a bit of back and forth, he eventually packed a bag and left. Kay had a conversation with his wife while I tried to process the mess my life had become. Eventually, we were invited inside. Kay called his mother, and we agreed to spend the night until her father could come the next morning to pick her up. She was scared that her husband might return, and she didn't want to be alone. Once inside, I felt invisible. No one noticed me. I sat there silently crying. While I understood that her situation was worse than mine, it still hurt that nobody even acknowledged me. At some point, everyone fell asleep, but I continued sitting there crying. I decided to end it all. I looked for pills, but I couldn't find any. In the end, I grabbed a long tool and planned to push it through my heart. I held the tool against my chest with both hands, took a deep breath, and it went a centimeter under my rib cage. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I left the tool on the table and returned to my chair, where I cried the rest of the night. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. Her father arrived at 5:30 in the morning and I let him in. He seemed remarkably calm given my appearance. He calmly asked me questions and if I was all right. I mumbled something incoherent. He went inside to find his daughter and I just stood there holding the door. Kay came out to talk to me, but I only stared at him before I passed out. I woke up in the hospital. That was 3 months ago. Kay stayed with me during the first few weeks after I got back home. He was worried I might try to offend myself again. I haven't spoken a word to my ex-fiancée. I changed my phone number, blocked her email, and cut off all access on social media. She has knocked on my door dozens of times, speaking through it, sometimes for up to 4 hours. She expresses how sorry she is and begs for forgiveness. She's claimed that she ended things with the other person, the AP. She says the AP's wife is divorcing him and that she lost her job because the AP's wife reported them to HR. Whenever she comes, I just sit on the other side of the door, listening to her while tears flow. It's like I'm inflicting pain on myself. I haven't replied to her yet. She's mentioned that she can sense movement at the door when I lean against it, so she knows I'm there. I haven't managed to heal at all. I still love her deeply, but my heart and soul are severely wounded. I'm consumed by anger, hatred, and shame. I understand I can never return to her, as it would utterly shatter my remaining self-esteem and self-respect. The confrontation at her parents' house and informing the AP's wife brought me no relief. If anything, I regret not just walking away from it all. People say that at some point you become numb or different. I hope that day comes soon for me, because right now, every day feels like a living nightmare. Update. I eventually decided to approach her parents to see if they could help convince her to stop coming to my door. Honestly, I don't care about her reasons or what she wants anymore. I've come to realize that how I perceived her and who she truly is are two different things. At this point, I just want her out of my life so I can move on. Maybe I'll get a cat or something to keep me company. But before I could talk to her parents, her dad unexpectedly showed up at my door. He brought a six-pack of my favorite beer and asked if we could have a chat. I agreed, but I mentioned I was heading out and suggested we talk while walking. I didn't want him to come inside, not just because my apartment has been a mess and reflects my state of mind, but also because I didn't want to risk her showing up at the door suddenly. Plus, if things got awkward, I didn't want to ask him to leave. Confrontation isn't really my thing, as you know. He opened a couple of beers and he began talking. He started by apologizing on behalf of his daughter. Then, he shared that his wife and daughter had been urging him to talk to me and convince me to talk to his daughter. But he made it clear that he had no intention of doing that. In fact, he supported the decisions and actions I had taken. He mentioned that his daughter had become spoiled and selfish, and he was hoping that she would finally have to face the consequences of her actions. He expressed the hope that maybe this experience would lead her to become a better person in the future. Then things took a strange turn. He started asking me a lot of questions about how I was doing. The questions he asked had a clear direction, and it was pretty obvious that he was hoping I was going through a lot of pain, right? It seemed like he was expecting me to be in considerable pain, and he might have even found some enjoyment in that. This really unsettled me, so I decided to tell him the exact opposite. I mentioned that I had moved on from his daughter, that her actions didn't bother me much, and that I was happy and moving forward. His reaction to my response was strange and disappointing. I couldn't figure out why he seemed that way. Then he started discussing my ex's pain. The way he talked about it was off, even though he was trying to mask it. It almost seemed like he was secretly pleased or finding some kind of joy in it. At that point, I decided to make a quick exit. I pretended I left something at home, said my goodbyes, and left in a hurry. I'm officially done with my ex now. Your advice, strangers on the internet, helped me snap out of it. I'm prepared to move on. Even though I'm still hurting and my self-esteem has taken a hit, I've reached a point where I'm ready to let go and move forward. Many of you were right, I think. I managed to avoid a serious problem, not just with my ex, but probably with her family as well. What kind of father takes pleasure in witnessing his own child suffering? Update. After reading the feedback on my previous post, I came to understand that I might have misinterpreted the situation with her father. He has consistently treated me well, and I hold a lot of respect for him. So I decided to reach out and have a conversation with him. You were correct. The questions he asked were leading because he was trying to figure out if there was a chance of reconciliation between me and his daughter. He mentioned he was hopeful about that possibility and that I had a positive influence on her. Interestingly, he also acknowledged that she didn't deserve me. Hearing this actually boosted my self-esteem, knowing he recognized this. The reason he had a smile while discussing his daughter was related to a long-standing disagreement he had with his wife about how to raise her. Over the years, he had repeatedly told his wife that allowing their daughter to get away with things, indulging her, and lacking discipline would lead to significant negative consequences in the future. His main regret regarding his daughter was allowing his wife to override his stance on this matter. He was smiling with a sense of anticipation as he was looking forward to proving his wife wrong. I asked him directly if everything was okay between us, and he assured me there were no issues at all. In a lighthearted manner, he joked about considering a divorce. Apparently, his confrontation with his wife and daughter after meeting me didn't go well. However, this time he expressed determination not to back down. It seemed like a confrontation that had been brewing for a long time. Regarding Kay, he has been consistently supportive, as always. He has stood by me and offered encouragement throughout. Now that I've distanced myself from the situation, I can see how right he was when he said I would eventually feel proud of my actions. I stood up for myself, something I rarely do, and I feel empowered by it. I'm certain I'll do the same in the future when it's necessary. My ex came to my door again, and this time I actually had a conversation with her. She pleaded with me to let her in so we could talk. However, I wasn't going to engage with her on her terms. If we were going to talk, it had to be under my conditions. I agreed, but I mentioned that I had some tasks to take care of first. I suggested meeting at a local park in half an hour. I didn't want her inside my messy place. Also, as some of you pointed out, meeting her alone could potentially protect me from any false accusations. Interestingly, I didn't feel nervous at all. In fact, I felt strangely good. For once in my life, I felt pretty confident in myself. So I went to the park, and there she was, crying. We sat down and exchanged some trivial small talk. She attempted to pry into what her father and I had discussed, but I firmly told her that our conversation was private between him and me, and, frankly, it wasn't her concern. As I started to lose interest, I asked her what she wanted to discuss. Then she launched into a lengthy monologue that lasted about an hour. She expressed how sorry she was, how much she loved me, how it was all so wrong, and how she had hurt me. She went on and on, begging me to consider reconciliation. She was willing to do anything. I told her that I forgave her because I didn't want to carry around the burden of anger, hatred, and pain any longer. However, I made it clear that reuniting was completely out of the question. It's not something that will ever happen. People who truly care for others don't behave the way she did towards me. Her actions have completely proven that she isn't a kind person. Acts like hers aren't what good people do. Having trust in her again is impossible for me. I explained to her that I want to share my life with someone who is kind, trustworthy, and truly loves and values me. Due to what she did, she no longer fits that role in my life. She cried uncontrollably, and I watched without much emotion. It was odd. I've never felt so detached from someone before. This sense of indifference isn't typical of me, at least not that I remember. I called her father to come pick her up, expressing hope that she seeks counseling to mend whatever is broken within her. I tried to offer some encouragement for her to overcome this situation, but she didn't seem receptive. Her dad arrived, and I explained the situation to him. I wished her well and good luck. Then I took an Uber to the local animal shelter and adopted a kitten. I named the kitten Shiny. Kay made a joke about my newfound courage, saying he was blinded by my shiny spine. So the kitten's name is Shiny, a reminder to stand up for myself. I'm content that I took the high road and honestly communicated with her without shouting or resorting to name-calling. I've been playing with my wonderful kitten, having a great time. Later, Kay is coming over for video games and some beers. I feel a sense of sadness for my ex and some pity. I'll miss the good moments we shared, but I'm also relieved that this chapter is closed. Some of you shared difficult truths that I needed to hear, and I'm thankful for that.